welcome to Author's Pen. I'm Jason Hutchens. With me today via Skype is author Douglas Wynne, who's going to be talking to us about the art and process of writing, as well as his new book, The Devil of Echo Lake. Douglas, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks very much for having me.
Right, before we get started, I think what we're going to do is take a look at the trailer that's been put together for your book. So we're going to take a peek at that.
Those four notes, I think I heard them in a dream.
I could lay the world before you like a dish. But first, you must be prepared to make sacrifices.
I think it's a message.
Well, Douglas, it was a compelling trailer. Where did that get put together at?
On a laptop at home, tight budget. But I had a lot of help from some great, very talented friends. So
Okay. So was this,
fun doing
was it your work or was this something that was put together by the publishing company?
That's mine. Again, I'm lucky to have my cover artist involved with illustration design elements and a friend who designs video games for some of the creature animation, all of the creature animation. My wife's a photographer. So yeah, we just kind of had a stone soup sort of situation where people got inspired to throw their own talent in, and I edited that together to some of my old music and some new music, as if it were my character's own music, Billy Moon, who's the rock star at the center of the story.
Oh, outstanding. So is it typical for a book to have a trailer, or is this something that you kind of came up with on your own to promote it?
It's fairly standard these days. You do see a lot of different approaches to book trailers out there. You know, sometimes it's just an author reading from the book, or a little bit of this sort of interview segment with some summary. But oftentimes they're like movies unto themselves. So it's sort of a wide open area right now for just finding any way you can to give people a taste of your story.
Okay. Well, I certainly want to get into some of the themes and ideas of the novel itself, but I'd like to, for our audience, talk a little bit about your background before we get into that. So tell us, how did you come to be an author?
Oh, a long, winding road. I knew I wanted to write when I was a teenager, and I had dabbled in it a bit. I wrote one probably awful novel when I was 15. Used to get in trouble in my actual classes because I'd be scribbling away at it, and teachers would think I was doing homework for some other class. But I got away from it when I became more immersed in music, and the guitar kind of seduced me away from the pen for quite a few years. When I finally got back to it, I realized that I had some things to say about the music business, and the book became a vehicle for doing that in the context of a haunted recording studio.
Oh, okay. So what were, this story is kind of a suspense horror genre?
Correct, yep.
Okay. So what were some of your writing influences that led you to this first book to be in the genre that it's in?
Well, again, you know, when I was younger, we didn't have a young adult category yet like they do now. So Stephen King was sort of like, the Hobbit led to the Lord of the Rings, led to The Stand for me, and so he's a huge influence for horror and suspense. Clive Barker is another who had a big impact on me stylistically. Ray Bradbury, Peter Straub. Um, those are probably the main guys in my pantheon.
Okay. You mentioned that the path to becoming an author was a long and winding road. Can you tell us about some of the experiences that maybe carried over into the book itself that led you to creating this story?
Things the book is sort of based on real life experiences.
Yeah, like personal
that informed it,
experiences that influenced like settings or places in the book.
Sure. Yeah, when I graduated from Berkeley, my focus had been audio engineering. That's my degree. So I had a placement in Woodstock, New York, where there was an amazing studio called Bearsville, which is sadly now closed. The music business has changed a lot, and a lot of big studios have gone under in the past decade. But it's upstate New York in the Catskills, so it's a very remote, woodsy kind of setting. There were cottages and cabins all over the grounds of the studio so that artists could escape from the city and have some peace and quiet and seclusion, privacy to record. And so I spent a couple of years there, and it seemed like a perfect setting for a horror story because, the cabin in the woods, right? It's a cliche. You always want to remove your protagonist from a lifeline, isolate them. So we had the creepy woods sort of setting. So that time I spent there as an assistant recording engineer and did some engineering on some records as well, that really informed the setting of my book, where they're all holed up in their little microcosm, and then horrific forces are at the door.
Okay. You talk a lot about, there's a lot of references to music, and the genre of music that the main character is involved in is, I believe it's alternative rock. Is that correct?
Yeah, sure. He's sort of a goth rock metal kind of icon.
Okay. And what made you decide to pick that as sort of the foundation of the story, or something that weaves throughout the story? Like, why not make it about a country music band or,
Sure,
whatever,
sure.
polka band? I don't know.
I think the simple answer is that, my own taste, I tend to like hard rock, and of course the other thing is that there's a real affinity between heavy metal, gothic rock, and horror entertainment, horror movies and books. So it was easy for me to imagine a character sort of like Marilyn Manson or Trent Reznor, who might be wrestling with personal demons, and that those demons, might become quite literal at times in a story like this, or there may be a line blurred between what's in his mind and what's actually happening. So that they seem to go together well, peanut butter and chocolate.
Okay. On book 2, man, that's the polka band. That's what you've got, a horror polka.
Right.
I mean,
That's going to be
a
harder
terrifying
sell.
form of music. So, all right. Well, did you listen to music while you were writing this novel?
Somewhat. Yeah, I do tend to get really focused on lyrics when I'm listening to music. I used to write lyrics, and so there are times when I can't have music on or it'll just distract me. But I knew that this was a very musical story that I was telling, and so yeah, I certainly tried to immerse myself intentionally in certain kinds of rock music. Nick Cave was a big influence. Again, Nine Inch Nails, and some gothic type atmospheric stuff like Dead Can Dance. And in fact, I have just recently, to celebrate the release of the book, I put together a playlist on Spotify. So for anyone who participates in that, it's a music streaming service, you can hear a soundtrack sort of to the book. A lot of stuff I listened to while I was writing it, and things that I think sort of capture the tone of the story.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Well, when you read the title, The Devil of Echo Lake, like, it sort of conjures this image. When I first heard it, it conjures this image of this like rustic lake, some country setting, and like as you mentioned before, the cabin in the woods kind of haunted story. But when readers get into the book, what they find is that Echo Lake is actually this recording studio. What made you decide to make the setting of the story this recording studio environment?
Well, write what you know is the sort of, commandment number one, I guess. And this was my first book, so I knew that I wanted to work in a setting that was familiar to me so that I didn't have to think about it too much. The details that would make it realistic were at my fingertips. Oddly enough, when I went back to Woodstock recently, I hadn't been there in about 13 years. And now that the book, I knew it was coming out, I wanted to revisit the old stomping ground, even though the studio was closed. And there's a scenic mountain that overlooks the town. Echo Lake is sort of a fictionalized, version of Woodstock or Bearsville. But the sign for hikers that I swear, never noticed back when I lived there, says that there is an Echo Lake not far from Woodstock, New York. It's not a town like in my book, but there is a remote Echo Lake, and I guess there's a Devil's Kitchen trail or something. Also, they're both on the same side, so that sort of seemed synchronous to me when I finally saw that.
Okay. The book is largely centered around two main characters. What prompted you to share the narrative between Billy and Jake, and what problems and opportunities came with that as you were writing?
It is Ben's story. He's the rock star at the center of the story, but his close ally is this recording engineer, Jake, who gets sort of thrust into the middle of this very high tension, high stakes situation where the producer, is to say the least a sadistic control freak, and maybe far worse than that. I knew that I wanted to explore that from more than one point of view, and that because Bill is an artist and he approaches the world a particular way, he's a bit of a poet, a bit of a visionary, very emotional kind of guy. And he can be unstable at times. I wanted to ground that with Jake, who is very rational. He's an engineer. So you get these sort of two sides to the same coin. And the book plays with themes of reflections a lot also. An early working title for the book was Black Mirror. So the idea that you've got, the artistic mentality on one side, the skeptical mentality on the other, and that together they're trying to figure out just what the hell's going on. I knew that would free me up to come at it from different angles. But as for problems, I had to, in the editing, figure out where I needed to cut some of Jake's story, because you kind of can only have one main character, I think, to really connect the readers in the space of 80,000 words. So that was sort of the problem, was bringing it back down to focus on Billy in the end.
Okay. You mentioned just a moment ago about a producer character that was sort of a sadistic control freak. Any parallels with your experiences in the music industry there?
I don't really remember names of some of these guys I worked with now, but sure, yeah, I had some rough, long nights in the studio with a couple of producers. There is one in particular that stands out. I'm kind of glad I can't name him. Yeah, when you're a young assistant engineer, you are kind of you're part waiter, and you're part slave, and you're part technician, and you're trying not to erase the tape while it's 2 in the morning and everybody else in the room is probably drunk or drugged out of their minds, and they've got some insane demands based on some sound that they're hearing in their head. So sure, some real guys and some famous producers informed the character of Trevor Rail, like, of course, Phil Spector, who used to wave a gun around in the control room. Even Simon Cowell from American Idol, a show that I've never been able to stand watching more than a couple of minutes of. The idea of a sort of domineering presence playing with an artist's emotions in a manipulative way, that was a key part of his character.
Well, let's talk about the devil that's in this book. The devil itself has been depicted through literature and music and art in countless ways over centuries. What's the nature of the devil in your novel?
To get back to the idea of mirror images, I knew I wanted to play with two different devil figures in the story, two different takes on it. One is the one represented by this producer character that we've been talking about, Trevor Rail, which is sort of your classic NA musician, sold his soul story. The guy with a contract in one hand and a knife behind his back, very slick, devil as salesman, devil as the tempter who knows what you've always wanted and how to make you cave in and make sacrifices for it. On the other hand, I thought, that story has sort of been told many times, and I wanted to also play with the idea of the old Greek god Pan, whose physical image, horns, cloven hooves, informs the visual symbol of the devil that was adopted along the way by the church, which I think is a very different kind of force of nature, a kind of pure, untamed, creative impulse. And I knew that for a rock star, for an artist like Billy, that would be something that he would want to sort of tap into, the sort of sexual urge, the creative urge. So as the book sustains questions about how much of these devils, you sort of got a devil on each shoulder, and how much of these is real and threatening to him, and how much is in his mind and is being projected by him. I had a lot of fun playing with that balancing act.
Yeah, it sounds like a complex weave of different ideas going on there. How challenging was it to write that into this book?
I think that stuff was kind of the easy part because it was so much fun to do. When you get to write dialogue as someone who could be the devil, that's a blast. I sort of threw everything at the wall in the early drafts. Every little anecdote I had heard about the music business or had experienced, every joke, and also all of this other metaphysical stuff that I wanted, the dark fantasy elements that I wanted to play with. So it was only really in the process of learning how to revise a book and make it something coherent that I had to kind of rein it in a little and find out where things were a little too much.
What was the most difficult part of the actual writing process? If you think about the writing process as a whole, prior to publication, what's the most challenging part of all that?
There's definitely a challenge in sticking with it and sitting down every day to put a little more of your story on the page. I think every writer knows that, finding the motivation to see it through to the end. But again, this was a fun one, so it kind of did take on momentum. Probably much harder was the part of the process where I needed to make some editing decisions in the process of trying to sell it, to pitch it to agents and editors. You don't often get a lot of feedback with your early rejections. You can use beta readers. I certainly did. I had a lot of friends who helped immensely with telling me what did and didn't work in the story. But in the end, you have to sort of decide for yourself as a writer what is not essential to the story you're telling, and there may be parts that you love because they're funny or they have a little truth in them, or you think they illuminate a character, but they may not carry the story forward with real momentum and sustain the tension that you would want in a horror suspense story. So that was hard, figuring out what to cut.
You mentioned about the daily process itself, or the having to sit down and keep the momentum going. Did you have specific goals in mind, like on a specific day, I'm going to do X number of words, or I'm going to write so many pages, or I'm going to get through a certain scene, or what was your thinking in terms of keeping yourself on a track and on a timeline to get this thing finished?
I think you hit it on the head right there. It's about a lot of small goals. I'm going to get 3 handwritten pages today. That was the goal for a long time. But then it becomes, I'm going to, edit X number of pages. I'm going to, apply so-and-so's notes to the whole manuscript by Friday. Give myself little deadlines to get myself in the groove of it, because after time away from a story and you come back to it, do subsequent drafts, I found that there's a little bit of trepidation about revisiting it. Is it going to be is it still good? The last time I read it, I think it was, getting there, but, am I going to be horrified this time that this is not, as near finished as I hope? So once I get into the rhythm of working on a certain part of the process, it's much easier to get immersed in that. So deadlines help, little goals definitely help.
Okay. Writers often, they'll hit challenges where they have to take a character or an event through a series of pivotal moments. You have these ideas in your head about, okay, well, this character is going to be in this place at this time, and this event's going to happen that's going to change the direction of that character or of the story. But a lot of times you don't always know what's going to happen in between. What kind of plot or character development snags did you run into while you were writing The Devil of Echo Lake?
Honestly, I've forgotten. I know I know there were some things early on in the process that I had to sit down and sort out. Sometimes it's chronology. Most readers aren't going to go through the book with a fine-tooth comb about that, but I knew that I had to, for myself, clarify exactly what day this happens, how many weeks are they there for, when does the next thing happen, because I knew it takes place in about the course of a season, about 3 months. And I wanted certain dates and weather to be part of that. A bigger thing was probably, okay, backstory. They're recording in a church where the place has a history, and one of the reasons that this manipulative producer has taken his art to this place is because he knows that Billy works best when he's kind of going crazy a little bit. He wants to put him in an environment that is a bit unnerving, has a history of being haunted by a woman who was hanged for witchcraft. So I had part of my story from this time in like the 1800s. I knew that people weren't still being hung for witchcraft at that point. I had to do some research and sort out, that this was in fact going to be a sort of vigilante mob thing. That I even wanted to know, where is she from? She's an Irish immigrant. How did they get here? Okay, so I learned how they came through Canada, and would typically be Protestant churches in this area. All stuff that never ended up in the book. People would never need to know it, but it slowed me down to figure it all out, to make sure that I was telling my story in terms that could fit into the real world, even though I'm playing with things that are far from real.
Okay. Well, how much research did you put into the book? Like, were there other large components beyond the one that you just discussed?
Not really. I think because, again, it was writing what you know. It was writing about an environment I was familiar with, a studio, and I had played in a band, so I could tell things from Billy's point of view with authentic details. I kind of chose this story because I knew I wouldn't have the excuse of slowing myself down with a lot of research, that I'd at least have the people and places I needed already very available to me.
Most general books on writing figure that a novel is generally in the 50,000 word mark. Did you have a target length set for this when you set out to writing it, or did you have a goal in mind for that?
Yeah, I kind of calculated that. I guess 50 is a little closer to a novella, okay. And a lot of first novels are around 80,000 words these days. That may change with ebooks. Now we may get a little more room, but financially, it's hard for a first-time author to sell anything that's longer than 80 or 90,000 words, unless it's like an epic fantasy, where the audience really wants length. I didn't think too much about that, but I knew that if I wanted to have something I could kind of respectably consider a novel, I wanted to aim for around 90 or 100,000 words. I also kind of knew from reading Stephen King's book on writing that it would be very beneficial to start long and cut, so that the end would be something a lot more focused. I ended up cutting about 20,000 words out of it. I ended up with a first draft of around 110,000. This is all boring to anybody who's not a writer. But
part of our audience
did the math about how many words I fit on a handwritten page, and I knew how many notebooks I had to fill for my first draft to be about novel length.
Okay, and I think part of our audience will actually be interested in the writing process, so that's the reason I asked some of the questions about it. One of the things that I heard you say that kind of surprised me was you mentioned that you had, one of your goals would be to write, say, 3 handwritten pages. So was your first draft of this manuscript entirely handwritten?
It was, yeah.
Wow, and so
I don't work that way now because it's too slow.
Okay.
But I did enjoy doing that. It kind of, you know, put me very much in touch with the process, which I enjoyed.
And at what point did you decide to like switch everything over to electronic and begin working in an electronic format?
When I started working on the second, well, for this first book, for Echo Lake, the second draft was created by typing up the first handwritten draft. So a lot of editing was done in the process of just entering it into a laptop. From there, you know, you want the efficiency of subsequent versions to be editable in the computer. But I did hear recently, I think on Joe Hill's blog, I love his writing. He did say that he will type up subsequent drafts, like a third draft, I think, will actually be manually re-entered so that a line really has to earn its place. And I admire that discipline, but I don't really have the time for it with a day job. So when I went to my second book, I knew that I wanted to produce fast. I wanted to get over the sort of anxiety of a first draft by just getting it down as fast as possible. So that was all entered on like a portable word processor, just so that I'd be able to have something farther along sooner. It took a long time going with the handwritten thing first time around.
Okay. Well, your book took a slightly different route in terms of how you were ultimately able to get it published. Can you tell us about the contest that actually allowed you to get this published?
Sure. I had been submitting it to agents for quite a while, and I'd been collecting my rejections, some of them very helpful and insightful. Sometimes people would read you know, a partial of the manuscript or even the whole manuscript after I'd spent some time revising to see if I could get more interest, more hits by editing the beginning of the book especially, and by revising the endless query letters. But ultimately, even though I got great advice out of that, that probably made the book ready to compete in this contest. It was a contest that resulted in the publishing deal. JournalStone, my publisher now, they're a small press that's growing fast. They're in San Francisco, and they had done one prior horror novel contest for 2011. So I'd seen how that, you know, the guy who had Brett Talley, who I'm proud to call sort of a label mate now. Things had gone very well for him. His book was nominated for a Bram Stoker Award.
Nice.
So I submitted for their second year, the 2012 contest, and tied place. And I didn't need suddenly I didn't need a pitch. I didn't need a query letter or a synopsis, which had driven me insane trying to summarize my book in a couple of weird pages that leave an awful lot out, especially a book that has a lot of plot twists. So that they were just reading my manuscript and seeing if they wanted to keep reading it. That was really refreshing to encounter, and it's what got me the deal.
Nice, okay. Well, Douglas, we're about out of time. Just very quickly, how do folks get a copy of The Devil of Echo Lake?
It's available on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com and my publisher's site, JournalStone.com. You can also get it at your local bookstore if you have them order it. Typically, we don't have sales reps on the ground trying to get it in every bookstore, but if you ask for it, it's distributed. They can certainly get a copy. It says electronic, paperback, whatever your favorite format is, it's out there.
Very nice. Okay. Well, Douglas, thank you very much for joining us today. Douglas Wynne's first book, The Devil of Echo Lake, is available now. It's a great story, wonderful read, so be sure to check it out. Douglas, congratulations on a tremendous achievement, and we hope the book is a great success for you. Thanks for sharing your story with us. That's all the time we have for now. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Author's Pen.
Thank you, Jason.